In this episode of Mind Pump, we talk about how to start your fitness and fat loss journey, and we break it down into 5 easy steps. Look, we literally created this episode for people to share with friends and family members that need to get started or want to get started with fitness or fat loss or on a health and fitness journey. If you're a fitness enthusiast and you're listening to our podcast and you want to send a podcast to somebody to help them get started, this is the one. This is probably our most shareable episode. This is probably one of our most valuable episodes for you to give to people to get them going. We're talking to the average person who's interested in getting started. So we listed 5 of the most important, easy to start steps for fitness and fat loss. Now, this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Chili. Now, Chili makes chili pads and oolers, which are products that cool or warm your bed. You use this water-cooled technology, you put it under your right on top of your mattress, underneath the covers or whatever, and you can set the temperature to cool your bed down or warm it up so you get amazing sleep. It also has 2 sides to it. So if you live with your spouse and your wife or your husband likes the bed to be a different temperature, their side can be controlled independently from yours. Now, because you listen to Mind Pump, you do get a big discount. So here's what you do. You go to chilitechnology.com. That's CHILI technology.com/Mind Pump. Use the code on the page and get between 15 to 25% off their products. One more thing I'd like to mention. If you're listening to this podcast and you're just getting started and you want more personal attention, you want more instruction, you want to see how exercises are broken down, you want a workout that's more personalized, go to mapsfitnessproducts.com. We've created many, many different workout programs for different people. One of the best MAPS program that we have for people who are just getting started is called MAPS Starter. Go check it out. All you need to follow that program is a pair of dumbbells and a physio ball. But we have lots of programs on there, including those that are for advanced trainees, advanced fitness enthusiasts. Again, you can find all of those at mapsfitnessproducts.com.
So this morning, I'm having a conversation with Jerry, who has just started with us in the last couple months. And I always like talking to someone like her. And what I mean by someone like her is really general population. She reminds me of just the average client that I would have that comes in and asks questions about health and fitness related. She's not a hardcore, gym goer, fitness person, but curious, interested in eating better and in exercising, and has a family, has a lot going on, works a lot. One of the things when we first got started with Mind Pump, we talked a lot about this, right? Like when we came into the space, in particular podcasting, we felt it was a bit of an echo chamber, that it was a lot of our peers speaking to our peers, talking about things that, hardcore fitness people are wanting to know. What's the new cutting edge science, and breaking down, modalities and the latest, greatest study that just came out and what's new here. And really, when we all talked to, when we first met, over 6 years ago, we all said, those are not the people I train. That maybe represents 1% of the people that I used to train. And really, the majority don't give a shit like that. They just want to know, what are the most basic things that I can do to get started, to make a change in my life, to be healthier, to be fitter. And I don't want all the crazy details. And so I was asking her, now that you're listening to the show, I said, are there some things that you would like to hear or that you've heard us talk about? And she was sharing some things that she's heard recently. And she says, I'd really like something that's just geared around, how do you start? Whether it be nutrition or exercise, brand new, just I'm going to start my fitness. Where do I start, or what should I do to kick it off and start? And I said, it's a good idea. We've done something similar to that, but we haven't organized a single topic episode in a while centered around that.
No, that's great because it's, first of all, that's most people. Right, that's most people. When we
high majority of people.
It is. When you're talking about things like the obesity epidemic, or you're talking about health epidemics or chronic health issues, what you're talking about are the average person. You're not talking about fitness fanatics and enthusiasts. And they're the ones that also get marketed to heavily, and they get communicated the wrong information. a lot of the myths around fitness and nutrition start because marketers target these general population people, and they just tell them the wrong stuff because it's catchy or whatever, and it fails. Obviously, people every single year, everyday people every year start a workout program of some sort, start a dietary change of some sort, and fails. I think the fail rate is something like 90%. So it's really important to not just figure out, that, okay, we're communicating to the average person, but also what are the things that they can do that will help them the most? And how can we communicate it in ways that are simple, easy to understand? Because this is kind of happens when you're in fitness, is you forget that. You start to lose touch with that, you know, because you understand things differently. You talk about things a little differently, and you forget that the people you're trying to help, you got to bring it to a different level and communicate it in a way that makes sense, and tell them the biggest bang for the buck changes they can make that are simple, because those are the things that are most likely that they'll stick to and that'll produce the best results.
This is also massively important for us. I mean, to revisit these types of topics, because we need to sort of evaluate what seems to be common and common knowledge to us. Like, it really still isn't to the high majority of people out there. And I think something like this, like a topic like this, is also good for people that have been listening to us for a long period of time, but also want to relay the information to, a family member or a friend, but they're like, wait a minute, how much of this can I, pass on without like overwhelming them with a lot of stuff?
Totally. So I want to start with like the most simple, basic, but also biggest bang for your buck changes that you can make to get started on a fitness and health journey. What are the simple, basic changes that you can do that don't require lots of knowledge, lots of work from a technical standpoint, things that you can do right now that will make the biggest change for you in starting your fitness journey.
And the most important part of this conversation, I think, is that, and I can't remember when I first said this, but I like repeating it because I think it's a good statement for most people to hear. And that's, we don't have a weight loss problem in this country. Millions of people lose weight every year. The problem is that everybody ends up gaining it all back. High majority, 80+% of those people gain all of that back and some. And I think a lot of that has to do with the overcomplicating this process.
Yes.
Versus, as a good coach or good trainer knows, the desired outcome is that I get my client to make fundamental change in their life forever. And so, getting into all the nuances of training and exercise and nutrition and cardio and going so deep, even if someone is smart enough to disseminate all that information, many times it's not something that they can implement into their life long term. And so, giving somebody like 5 basic things, which is what we'll do today, that you can start to implement into your life that can make a fundamental change forever. And a good goal when we go over these 5 is to be targeting all 5 of those and making them a part of your lifestyle forever, and at least attempting multiple of them and never stopping.
In fact, if all you ever did was the 5 steps we're about to talk about, you're going to be 85% of the way there. You'll be very sad. Most people will be very happy and satisfied with the results that they get and how they feel and the improvements in their health and fitness if all you ever did are the following 5 steps that we're going to talk about right now. So the first one, and this is the big one, and it's funny because I've talked about this one for a long time. I know you guys have too, but we now have studies to support just how powerful this first step is, and that is to avoid heavily processed foods. Now, heavily processed foods are foods that we tend to find in wrappers or bags or boxes. They have long shelf lives. They have large ingredient lists. These are engineered foods. Now, by themselves are not inherently unhealthy, although most heavily processed foods are less healthy than whole foods. But that's not really the problem here, because could you find foods that are more processed that are technically healthier? You could, but here's the big issue. Heavily processed foods are engineered, and most of the science and engineering that goes into these foods is designed to get you to eat more of this particular food. It's called hyperpalatability. palatability. Okay, and this is what food manufacturers and companies aim for when they make processed foods, and they're so good at it that it sure as hell makes people overeat. In fact, it's funny that we've had this debate for a long time. What caused the obesity epidemic? And at first it was like, oh, we're moving less. That's the big problem. And then it was, no, it must be fat. We're eating too much fat. And then no, it's too much carbs. Mm-hmm. The reality is, although the lack of activity and the eating more carbs and fats might have contributed, those aren't the real problem. The real issue is that our diets went from largely whole natural foods, and whole natural foods are just foods with one or two ingredients, like a banana. What's the ingredients of a banana? Banana, right? Mm-hmm. Meat, eggs, milk, vegetables, even rice. Those types of things are whole and natural. Our American diet went from primarily eating a majority of our diet with whole natural foods to a transition where most of our foods were heavily processed. And in fact, if you match the market penetration of heavily processed foods and you take that chart, what percentage of Americans ate heavily processed foods and what percentage of our diet made up of, you could literally place it over a chart of obesity and it matches it 100%. And the reason is these foods make you eat more. And we now have studies that show, and these are really good studies, by the way. The problem with food studies in the past is they are survey-based epidemiology type studies where people will fill out a survey and talk about what they, and those are just classically inaccurate. People often, they over-report, under-report. You don't have people in a lab. You're not watching exactly what they do. Well, here's what they did with some of these studies with heavily processed food. They literally took groups of people, put them in a laboratory. So everything was controlled. They could watch everything. They gave one group full and free access to whole natural foods. They took another group and they gave them full and free access to heavily processed foods, and they controlled the macros being proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. They made it similar. Okay, so that wouldn't be they could control that factor. And then they said, just eat until you're full, and then when you're not full, stop eating, and that's it. Just continue eating. And then the best part about this is they did that for a while, then they switched the groups. So now they took the same group that was in the whole natural foods, put them in the processed foods, and vice versa. And they've done several studies like this. And what they find is, on average, when people eat heavily processed foods, they eat 500 more calories a day automatically. 500 calories is not a little.
No, it adds up quick. That
is a lot. In fact, and it's not perfect math, but technically, that's like a pound of body fat a week or so,
right? Yeah.
That you could gain from. In fact, when someone's cutting their calories, 500 is a lot to cut,
right,
from your diet. And these people were not trying to diet. They weren't trying to watch what they were eating. They were just eating until they felt satisfied. And that's how powerful these foods are. So inadvertently, when you avoid heavily processed foods, you naturally eat more appropriately. You naturally reduce your calories.
One of the reasons why I love this as a first piece of advice for somebody is of course, if someone hired me, I like them to download an app and track their food so I can be very precise about all of this and I could teach them macros. But when we're talking to the masses, right? Or like maybe this podcast gets shared with somebody's mom who's not really into fitness and is not going to go weigh and track their food, which is a lot more people than the other side, right? There's a lot more people that will not put in fact, this is actually one of my tricks that I do within my own family, right? So being a fitness guy, of course, anytime I'm at a family event or talking to any family members, everybody wants me to tell them the diet. Well, one of my ways of getting out of that, because I know that if I spend time doing that with everybody, I'll write 100 diets and nobody will follow them. One of my ways of getting out of it is I tell them, like, listen, if you put the work in and you track your food for a week, I will sit down and evaluate it, and like 90% of them never do that. So the truth is, I know that most people won't do that. And my thing back to the family is like, listen, if you can't commit to just tracking for a week, I'm not going to sit down and formulate a meal plan for you. You're never going to follow, right? But the truth is, this simple advice, and this came from me way later. I didn't do this early on. I mean, very early on, we used to have software that would print off, you put in somebody's weight and their goal and their activity level.